Hi, this is Lynn McCool, and in lieu of class tonight, I would like to have a brief discussion concerning the 5 canons of rhetoric and using those to analyze the I Have a Dream speech of Martin Luther King Jr. This is something we would have done real time in class, but I realized that you have a snow day today, and so some of you may not physically be able to get to Red Hill 2 for whatever reason. I realize that you can, for most of you, log in remotely, and so instead of running the class real time, what I'd like to do is just have you participate in this discussion. On the discussion board, I've put some question prompts for you to think about and to respond to, and then I'd like for you to respond to each other just based upon some of the things that you see in King's speech. But first, before we do that, let's just have a brief recap of the 5 canons of rhetoric, the rhetorical situation, and also the rhetorical appeals, because each one of these different categories or elements play into our understanding of rhetoric and help us to understand why we are able to craft persuasive speech and the elements that go into persuasive speaking. So first, let's talk about the rhetorical situation. It's also sometimes known as the rhetorical triangle. In the rhetorical situation, we have 3 points on the triangle, which comprise the audience, the speaker, and the subject or the message. And in a rhetorical situation, as you know from the reading in your text, rhetorical public speaking has to do with responding to something called the exigence. And the exigence is a situation or problem that occurs that really incites or causes the speaker to create some form of communication in order to communicate out or respond to whatever that problem or situation happens to be. Obviously, speakers don't speak in a vacuum, so they have to have an audience. And the fact that speakers do have to have an audience means that in our communication and the way that we craft our communication, we have to be thinking about the audience. And of course, then there's always the message or the subject that is being communicated. Now, what is interesting is that within the rhetorical situation, the speaker, the audience, and the subject or message is always bounded by context. So there are always physical as well as other kinds of contextual elements that come into play. So for example, when we're thinking about King's speech, we can think about the contextual elements of the racial tension during that time, or the actual physical elements of where the speech was delivered. And we can bring into that contextual scenario any number of bounding agents that comprised that particular speaking situation to that group of people. Of course, all speaking situations then are driven by purpose, so we don't just speak randomly. We don't speak gibberish, or we don't just speak out of the top of our head. We actually have a purpose for speaking. That's part of rhetorical public speaking. And so again, that purpose is also controlled to some extent by its contextual factor, and the purpose is also driven by what the response is to the exigence. So one way to consider the rhetorical situation and to try to get at who the speaker is, who the audience are, and what the message might be, we can use a little heuristic here to help us figure out those elements. So the first thing that we would look at is speaker. So who is or are the individual or collective voices that is or are speaking or writing in the text. So sometimes you can have both. You can have an actual individual speaker who is the one who is delivering the message, but that speaker may also represent a collective voice. So that's something to consider. We want to think about the occasion. Now here come in some contextual factors. So what is the exigence or the catalyst, the historical background, series of events that are causing the speaker or writer to speak or write. Audience. So who is the direct receiver of this message? That's the first thing that we usually think about. But then we can also expand audience out. So perhaps there is an immediate audience that receives the message, but there also may be extended audience members who may not be physically present, or may not even be bounded by that point in time, who are receiving the message sometime later. So we want to think about many different layers of audience, from immediate to very far away. Purpose. What is the general reason behind the text? Now, sometimes people confuse purpose with occasion. Purpose and occasion are not the same thing. Purpose has to do with our intent. What are we trying to accomplish with the particular speech? So occasion has to do with responding to something, but purpose has to do with intent. So are we trying to persuade? Are we trying to inform? Are we entertaining? Are we trying to build goodwill? What's our purpose? The subject, of course, has to do with the general topic or the main idea, and then the tone has to do with the attitude of the author. So what kind of connotative emotional coloring is infused into that speech delivery? Is the speaker angry? Is the speaker concerned? Is the speaker happy? What kind of emotional, affective elements are present in that particular speech? Third aspect to consider when analyzing a speech are the persuasive appeals. So of course we have logos, which is the appeals to reason, using logic or reason, strong organizational element to the speech. Pathos, which is an appeal to emotion, and again, we're not computers. We don't just think merely through logical reasoning. We also need that emotional appeal, and of course our appeal to emotion is part of what makes us human. And then finally, ethos, which is the persuasive appeal of one's character or ethical conduct. So again, it's hard for us to trust a speaker or to believe what a speaker says if we do not think that that particular speaker has good character or is someone who is going to deliver a message that is believable or reliable or trustworthy. So as you listen to Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech, mark your text for the following. I have provided the text for you. You can print it off, or you can copy and paste it into a Word document, however you want to do that. But mark the text for the following: for the rhetorical situation, the speaker, the occasion, the audience, purpose, subject, and tone. And then afterwards, we'll look at how this speech exemplifies those 5 canons of rhetoric. Okay, thinking about the 5 canons of rhetoric, of course, we have invention, which are the ideas, arrangement, which is organization, style, which has to do with diction or word choice, and syntax, which is sentence structure, and the use of figurative language, imagery, rhetorical devices to help accomplish the creating of the style of language that's used. And of course, we use style and language so that we can add emphasis where it's needed. Memory, which is recalling information when needed. And then delivery, which is the actual performance of the speech. So it's everything. It's the speaker's deportment, it's the content, it's the way that it's delivered, it's the context and the situation in which it's delivered. Everything, the whole package, is bound up in the performance or the delivery. Okay, so here are some ideas to think about as you're analyzing for invention in King's speech. You know, your book talks about this idea of topoi, or commonplaces, and basically what it's talking about is this idea of going to those places where ideas reside. And we can think of a number of places for us personally where we go to get information about what's going on in the world, of what's being talked about. And we even talked about that in the first couple of class sessions, that many of us are reliant on the internet, and we use things like Twitter or other kinds of aggregators to collect information from news sources and from various other places that we trust to give us reliable information. So what I'm going to ask you to think about are, what are the commonplaces that Martin Luther King Jr. drew upon in order to construct this particular speech? Where did he go to get ideas? And also, I want you to think about, what assumptions did he make about his audience? In thinking about those 2 questions and attempting to answer those 2 questions, I'll give you a hint. One of the techniques he used is called allusion. And here's the definition of allusion. Allusion is evoking historic and literary references, and within literary we may even include biblical references, okay, biblical literature as well. Evoking those historic and literary references This is a very powerful speech writing technique which can be executed explicitly in the form of a direct quotation or implicitly in the form of an allusion. Okay, second canon is arrangement or organization, and of course this is the actual structure of the speech, the logical format of it. How does it flow? And how does the speaker get us from point A to point B? So if you were to outline this speech, what would you say would be its major sections? So on a very high level, how many major sections do you see? 2, 3, 4? So discuss that in the discussion board there. Okay, in thinking about style, how does King use language? What kind of diction or word choice does he use? What type of syntax or sentence structure? And most importantly, how does he use figurative language and imagery to build or paint a picture in his audience's mind? Okay, in terms of memory, I want you to think about, how does King deliver this speech? Is it strictly from memory? Is he using some kind of notes? Does he have a podium in front of him? How well prepared does he appear to be as far as his execution and being able to remember the points that he wants to convey to his audience? Finally, I want you to think about delivery and the entire speech itself. How does King use ethos, pathos, logos, and how do those work together to provide for a complete delivery? And I'll leave you with this last thought described by one linguistic scholar who has commented on King's speech and said that the I Have a Dream speech was not a legal brief on the intricacies of the civil rights movement in America, nor an intellectual treatise on the plight of Black people. Rather, it was a fervent, emotional sermon forged out of the language and spirit of democracy. King's mastery of the spoken word, his magnetism, and his sincerity raised familiar platitudes from cliche to commandment.